Hey everybody, and welcome back. As you can see, I'm trying a new headset today. Last week's listening back, it felt kind of crackly and echoey. So we're trying something a little bit different and see how it goes. But enough of that, let's get started. In my last video, I walked through a Colonial Pipeline ransomware tabletop from the perspective of a CISO. We focused heavily on business decisions, such as what is the business impact? Who needs to be involved? And what does the leadership need to know? Now, these are definitely high-level questions that need to be answered in any incident. And for our first time, I felt we did pretty good. But today, I wanted to look at the same incident from a completely different perspective. This time, I'm the incident response lead. Our job isn't to make the final business decision. Our job is to figure out what happened, determine how far the attacker got, contain the threat, preserve any evidence, and coordinate the technical teams, as well as give leadership the information they need to make those decisions. All right, with that, let's get started. So, as some of you remember, we'll go back through it again. It is early Monday morning. As the incident response lead for a large critical infrastructure organization, our SOC has started receiving reports that employees are unable to access systems. Shortly afterwards, we're seeing indicators consistent with ransomware. At this point, I don't know how the attacker got in, how long they've been there, how many systems are affected, whether credentials have been compromised, whether data has been stolen, or whether the attacker has access to our operational technology environment. And that's where we're going to start. Real quick, I'm going to stop there and let you know these questions don't have to happen with just ransomware. These are valuable questions that need to be answered in almost any incident to help before you close it. But that's a side note. We'll continue on. All right. So we'll start off with the alert we got. Multiple endpoints reporting suspicious file encryption activity. So my first instinct on a scenario like this is definitely not to start rebuilding machines. I need to establish what we're dealing with. So again, same with similar to the CISO, we need to understand the scope. So here are the questions that I'm going to be asking my first time. So what systems are affected? Are we seeing same indicators across multiple hosts? Are these systems communicating with each other? Are any domain controllers or critical infrastructure being affected? Our accounts, do we know any accounts, any privileged accounts being used? And are we aware of any accounts that are being used? Is encryption still occurring, or have we not seen any for a little bit? And lastly, do we have evidence or do we know of any data exfiltration? Now, this is clear. This is not limited to our IT environment. Are we seeing this in our OT environment? Now, when I was doing this, and maybe other people know this, I want to be clear. To me, the IT environment are things like workstations, servers, things like that. I guess that. OT would consist of more things like thermometers, network valves for the oil pipeline, maybe printers. These are more operational technology devices. So when we go through this, if I use IT devices, we're talking about servers and workstations. OT are less interface medical devices, panels for flood control, things like that. I guess it's pipeline, so we're going to probably be focused more on that. With that said, and that clarification set, let's start off with our first decision point. What is our first action? So again, we got the alert that several systems are being encrypted. We haven't really started the investigation yet. We just got in and kind of were given that information. So, do we begin rebuilding affected machines? Isolate affected systems? Shut down the entire network? Or continue to investigate before taking action? Now, when we're asked that question, I guess I always go back to, and there's different forms, but I go to the pick roll method. Preparation, identification, containment, eradication, recovery, and lessons learned. To me, like the OSI model or anything, it gives me a starting point and a point to work down. So preparation, these are tabletops, things that we're do before any incident. Identification, this happens kind of when the alerting happens, when we're notified. There's other things involved, and we can go in that deeper if that's what you want. But then you have the containment, stop the bleeding, categorize, kind of get things controlled. Eradication makes it sound, get rid of it, find those artifacts and hunt down that and remove that. Recovery, setting up the systems, lessons learned, kind of a post-mortem. Now, I know that was high level, and I would have no problem going over my interpretation of that more if that is something that we want, and I may do that in a further lesson. But if we go back to that first action point, what is our first action? Begin rebuilding affected machines. That hits the recovery method, and I think we're a little too early for that. Isolate affected systems, that's in that containment. I don't think we're too early for that, and I think that's a definitely solid place to be starting. Shut down the entire network. That's a broadsword. It is in that containment, and if we felt that that was needed, it definitely could. But at this point, I think, again, that's a heavy hand, and I believe I feel we would need more input if we get to that. Continue investigation before taking action. Now, I definitely believe the continued investigation, but before taking action, I think we need to help. So, to me, I'm going to say B with D happening simultaneously. Instant response isn't necessarily a sequence where you finish the investigation and then containment begins. All these processes sometimes you will have to do. And the business need, at the end of the day, will be coming first. So could we begin rebuilding affected machines? 100%. If leadership comes and says, during your investigation, I want known affected machines to be taken offline and re-imaged and put back online, you can give your feedback, but at the end of the day, business operations come first. And that is something that I've had to learn through many incidents, and I think it needs to be clearly stated here. So in a serious incident, we're often doing both simultaneously. Like I said, we need to stop the bleeding while we're still trying to figure out where the blood or the infection is coming from. So, kind of got our hands on what we're going to be doing. We're going to be investigating while we contain the systems that we know about. Well, what are we next doing? What are we going to do next? Let me take a drink, sorry. At this point, I'm going to formally activate an instant response process. The reason I feel that an instant response process needs to be activated is you want defined roles. I think this is critical for any incident. They are messy. People are going to be flustered, frazzled, and trying to do multiple things at once if they do not have clear guidance. Me as an instant response lead, that is one of my major jobs, is to keep things calm as they be and give defined roles. Now, depending on your environment, you may only have one or two people. Heaven forbid you only have one, but you work with what you have. But some of the roles, obviously, that we would have, and again, want to be clear, some of these can be combined. You would obviously have the IR lead. Forensic specialist, if you have somebody in that role, that'd be amazing to collect and analyze evidence. Threat hunting. This is a person that's taking those IOCs and hunting through your environment. Do you see hashes for processes? IPs hitting the network? Any files or anything that you might see that from a known bad actor could be hunted and found. Endpoint team. These team would help you with isolation and later remediation of those systems. Network team, giving you help for network telemetry. Network segmentation, blocking, and telemetry. I can't believe I couldn't say that. Then the identity team, helping you with credentials, authentication, killing sessions, things on that side. Infrastructure, your servers, that server environment, endpoint team. Again, some of these might be the same people, but servers and endpoints are definitely different beasts and might need different people. Communication and leadership liaison. Again, might be the lead, might be somebody else, but somebody who is keeping leadership informed majority of steps so they know where you're at, what you're doing, and if they have questions, they can get quick and decisive answers. My responsibility as IR lead isn't necessarily to personally touch every system. My responsibility is to make sure that the right people are working on the right problems. And that is really what you have to remember. You may not be down in the nitty-gritty all the time. Sometimes you might be. But your job is to orchestrate and make sure things are running smoothly and coordinating between the different teams. So, the team confirms that multiple systems are actively communicating with each other. We also identify several compromised user accounts. So, at this point, we're still in the containment phase, but we're starting to do some triage or some eradication. We're isolating the confirmed compromised endpoints, so this is going to be continually consistent. As we're finding them, we're isolating them, pulling them off our network if we're able to. And I want to be clear, this does not always mean just taking a plug and unplugging them. There are tools that you can isolate, network segmentation. CrowdStrike can do containment. I believe other endpoints can actually contain devices from the source where you can still access things from them in a secure and safe manner without having to lose any of that metadata or forensic evidence. Okay. Identify compromised accounts. Again, what accounts were used? To me, at this point, if a system has had ransomware, accounts that were on that system would need to be looked at. If we have known accounts, we can see user A initiate these processes, definitely high priority. But if user A just logged into the system and then it was compromised, you have to make a judgment call. Is it better to reset their credentials? Again, sometimes these, but as a lead, I believe so, unless there's a reason not to. And we could go into that deeper. Again, disable or reset credentials when appropriate. And when that does, we also want to revoke active sessions and tokens so there's no persistence. And again, block unknown malicious infrastructure, servers, any other devices that we might know, looking for lateral movement in that process. What systems talk to each other? If system A, a known bad system, communicated with 3 servers, we have to assume those servers might be compromised. Do we mean we isolate them? No. But we do want to look at them and find out if they have. With any incident, we cannot let our emotions get involved. We need to let the facts speak for themselves. Again, decisions might need to be made, but you can't just jump to conclusions. Big thing is protecting your backups. Make sure those are still secure and away. If we have to pull that offline, let's pull that offline. Make sure that when we start on our recovery phase, we're able to have a solid, good, known good backup that we're not compromised. Again, one thing I don't want to do is blindly block everything or reset everything. It is bad for business. It's bad for trust. And at the end of the day, it does not guarantee success. So you want to be very sequential. Make sure that you're doing things for a known good reason with good intelligence. Sometimes you do have to make that decision, but you should have good intelligence backing it. Every containment action has potential operational consequences. And at the end of the day, operations is what pays the bills and the business relies on. So we got to make sure the best we possibly can to keep operations going. So with any incident, you're going to have a problem. And this one came to us here from a blind side. So we've just contained several of the corporate systems. We're in our middle of triaging, finding, eradicating credentials. But our network team just came in and said, hey, there's communication paths between our IT environment and our system supporting our OT environment. This is big because now we have a whole nother avenue that we might have to dig into, or that we will have to dig into. But the question is, again, we don't have any evidence it was compromised. We just know there was communication. So we don't have enough evidence to yet confidently say that isn't compromised as well. This is where the IRL needs to understand something very important, in my opinion. Okay? Just because you don't have evidence doesn't mean there is no evidence. What we need to do at this point is pivot. And any good lead, any knows that when things are working, or not working, you got to take a breath and make a judgment call. At this point, we either need to pull in another team, if we have one. If not, we need to pull from existing teams. Maybe some server and storage, maybe some infrastructure or some client engineering or workstation, and start having them look at that OT environment. The threat hunter, do you see any of these IOCs, indicators of compromise, in our OT environment? Do we see more than just a few connections? Were there successful connections? These are questions that need to be answered, because with any time you have this new information and you bring this to leadership, they're going to ask, well, do we need to isolate that OT environment? Do we need to shut down some of our operations? Now, as I mentioned before, we are not in the IR team making the big decisions. Our job is to provide technical facts. What do we know? Well, we know that we have a ransomware scenario. We still haven't figured out if data was exfiltrated. We have quarantined the machines that we know about. We're threat hunting for anything new. We are getting rid of, we're resetting credentials and dropping tokens. We also know that one or some of the affected systems reached out to our OT environment. What we don't know yet is, are they compromised? And is there still a connection? So we would need to bring in business leaders, and this is, again, bringing that channel together and saying, okay, if we isolate, what are the consequences? What would you as leaders feel confident that we would need to do this? What data would we need to do? Hopefully we don't have to isolate that OT environment. Hopefully we caught it beforehand. But again, that's a real world scenario where you might have to make that decision where you shut that down. Be very sure that you need to. And again, that would be my phase. So we've got things contained. We're now starting to dig this in. This is where we move into that digital forensic side. We need to understand what happened. This will give us more information if the OT was compromised. Take that breath, not slow down, but start getting through the investigation methodology of the investigation, and start answering some questions. When did the attacker first gain access? Maybe how did they gain access? Was it a USB drive? Were credentials stolen? Was it a phishing email? Or phishing? Or did they get on premises? How did they get into our environment and gain that access? On top of that, did they establish persistence? We need to be clear. Just because we contained known infected systems doesn't mean there isn't some sleeper sitting out there for persistence where they can access later on. We have to assume, not by containing, but by investigation, anything that was touched has a chance of being infected in some way. How do they move? What ports did they use to move across laterally? What credentials? What did they touch? What privileges did they have? Did they have or access anything above user level privileges? And if they did, what could they do with those privileges? What information do they have access to? Was there confidential information? Was there servers that they had access that had file storage? Was any of this removed? These are questions that at this level we need to start answering. Again, it's not just trying to find the malware. It is trying to reconstruct the attacker's story so at the end of the day, we can better understand them, we can thwart them, make sure that they have confidence that they're cleanly out of our environment, and prepare for the next attack that will always be on around the corner. With that, let's look at kind of some of the stuff that we want to look at. So at endpoints, we want to look at some process execution, file creation, network connections, persistent mechanisms. Things we would look at as MFT tables if they are not encrypted, prefetch files, SHRM databases, see if we have any network. Things that are not normally encrypted, see if we can see any of that stuff. Any security logs, PowerShell logs, any registry artifacts that may have not been encrypted. Let's get those through our memory. Let's see what we can find to see if we can get more data from it. On our network side, you got your firewalls, any net flows, IDS or IPSs, DNS. How do they move and cross our environment? Where was that initial access? Can we find patient zero? Was there any outbound connections? These are key on that network side. Identity authentication logs. If we have a cloud provider, those will have great MFA events. Any account elevations. Again, using Azure, M365, audit logs, cloud. Whatever tools you have, at the end of the day, the tools aren't what matters. Some will make it easier. You might have to get your hands dirty and really dig into the nitty gritty. The goal isn't to collect every log in the company. The goal is to collect evidence necessary to answer those questions we're trying to ask. At the end, when we go through this, we got to not lose focus and keep our scope. There's a good distinction for an IR lead. Eventually, a team identifies a suspicious account that appears to be involved early in the attack. Great. So through all this investigation, we found an account that's seen. Is this patient zero? It could be, but again, we don't want to jump to conclusions. The first compromised account we find isn't necessarily the first point of compromise. We need to correlate timestamps. Did they pivot from another account to that account? Is there any telemetry, network traffic, email activity, anything else that proves that? That is why this timeline is important. We need to make sure that we can put the story together without or as little as holes as possible. Every hole can lead for another attack to slip through. Whew, that was a lot. We have found a patient zero, or we have built a timeline, we built the story. At the end of the day, or a few days, just be clear, this is not just a few hours of work. I know in a tabletop exercise it feels that way, but this could be days worth of work of switching out, making sure that you get rest. I don't know if I can express how important it is in this, how fast this went. That day will go that fast. You will be mentally exhausted and want to jump to conclusions. That's why following that methodology is so important. Write these questions down. Go back to them when you start going through this. Making sure that we have that timeline so you can follow that cleanly. Enough of that tangent, but it is something that I've seen and I think it's very important. Let's hit the recovery phase. We've contained the attack. We understand the primary attack path. We've identified compromised accounts, and we've collected the evidence we've seen. Now leadership wants to start rebuilding. Again, as I've said before, sometimes you will be rebuilding through the other processes, so know that. In a paper level, it's nice to say at the end, there's lots of times that you will be rebuilding and the recovery phase in the middle of your investigation. Just be aware of that. So we start rebuilding. Before we start rebuilding system, I need confidence the attacker is no longer has access. This is key, but you want to be careful because Again, operations have to be going. So you might be validating that they don't have access as you're building up. So just know this. You want to make sure that you kind of have a checklist. Is that initial access closed? Compromised credentials addressed? Persistence removed? Privileged accounts investigated? Backdoors, any backdoors that might have been set up and identified? Known IOCs searched across the environment and double searched? Is your EDR retuned, set up? Make sure it's clean. Know if it didn't alert, why it didn't alert. Logging validated and backups validated. Recovery isn't simple. It is a process. You reimage, restore, move on. You need to validate, eradicate, rebuild, monitor, and then validate again. It is an ongoing process that's not going to be done after you think. You have a long road still ahead of you to get back. All right. That was a lot. We are tired. We've had weeks of work, and we need to go and talk to our CEO. They're going to go and say, are we secure? We need to be careful. Now we've answered our questions and we feel good about being secure. But just it's not a simple yes and no answer. I would say, based on our investigation, we've contained the known attackers' activity and addressed the compromised systems and accounts we've identified. We've also completed searches for known indicators across our environment. At this point, we have no evidence of continued attacker identity. However, I would not tell you that we're 100% secure. Instead, I would explain our confidence level, but I'd also give him steps for future. Where did we go wrong? Did the EDR fail? Was it training? Was it an IDS, NDS? Was it unsecure passwords? I've heard this multiple times, but I will say this again. Never let a good incident go to waste. Take that time to address known risks, patch management, things that we would need to be more secure in the future. As an IR lead, getting asked these questions, if done correctly, you have weight. You have a little bit of weight. I don't even think of the word right now. But you have the ability to say, hey, we got to this point. For our future, we need to really look at and give some list of things that you saw that could have been better, that may have slowed or even stopped the system or the attack beforehand. Whew, that was a lot. So what did we learn from the IR lead? Things that I feel that we learned was containment and investigations happen together. I would also add sometimes recovery. The pick roll method is a great methodology, but it's not linear. You may be going in circles a few times, but making sure that you understand and follow it is key. Lesson 2, and one that I still have trouble with, the IR lead does not have to personally do everything. You may not be a manager, you may not be, but at the end of the day, you coordinate people and maintain that operational picture. You're a lighthouse in the middle of the waves. Your job is to give people hope, coordinate, and make sure that they know that they're going in the right direction. Technical decisions have business consequences. Things like things like containment, resetting passwords. All these things have a business impact. Be sure that when you make those decisions, you have evidence to back the reason you're making those. Evidence drives those decisions. Okay? And, last 2 things I think we learned. Recovery isn't the same as eradication. Eradication is finding those IOCs, closing those back doors, making sure those accounts are set up. Recovery could be a part of that, but it's not the same thing. And lastly, and another thing that I still have to work on, is one of the reasons I'm doing this, communication is part of incident response. I still have to work on being able, as you can hear throughout, I get my words mixed up, I get excited, I speak too quickly. These are things that sometimes we, as IR team leads, need to work on. We can understand the technical stuff, but it's that communication part that's key. I have spent years developing technical side of incident response, and now I'm challenging myself to be better, leading the response, communicating, and situation, and helping organize make these decisions. You guys are amazing. I'm going to wrap up this tabletop. Few questions. If you were an IR lead, I'd love to hear how you would have handled it. Would you have isolated the IT environment from the OT? What evidence would you have prioritized? And what would your first 3 actions have been? And critique me. What have I missed? Put those in the comments. I'm going to continue doing these tabletop exercises. I think I'm going to work on an architecture one for next week. Again, to better and look at maybe what tools and things that we would put into this environment. After that, we'll work on something things. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.